there. But hello and welcome. My name is Chris Henry. I'm the moderator for our panel discussion on asset management. I'm joined by two friends and colleagues here with Roger Allen and Abid Butt. I'll actually let both of them give you a quick intro of who they are, just so you're aware, and I'll give a quick intro of myself after them, and then we'll get our questions rolling. Roger, this is the curveball I was going to throw you. Instead of going with the questions first, but maybe if you want to give us a quick 30 seconds or a minute on who you are and your experience, and then we'll turn it over to Abid.
Yeah, sure. My name is Roger Allen, so I'm the Group CEO of RLA Global. We are an advisory firm specialized in resorts and destinations, serving both the public and private sector. We, as a company, we specialize really in all of those experiences that happen outside of the bedroom, so to speak, and actually are key and core to the success of the resort and the destination. So it's everything that's happening outside that is fundamental to key revenues and the positioning of the asset. We have an office in Las Vegas. In Europe, we are based in Budapest, and in the Middle East, we have an office in Dubai. Back to you.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that, Roger. Abid, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Abid Butt. I am managing director for AB Ambassadors, again, an advisory firm that consults on hotel projects and tourism destinations. Long time hotel junkie, worked all around the world. And these days, I also produce a webinar series called Hospitality Talks, which is similar to what we're doing. We're discussing challenges facing the industry all around the globe, and glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Excellent, thank you. My name's Chris Henry. I'm the CEO of Majestic Hospitality Group based in Los Angeles. And we do hotel and resort development consulting, and we work globally. So I'm excited to be the moderator and be with these fine gentlemen again, even though it's not at a conference this time, it's virtual. So for all the attendees, there is a chat feature here in Zoom that you're probably already aware of, but any questions that you may have while we're discussing, please send them through and we will work your questions into the conversation. The format of what we're doing here is I'm going to be directing questions to each of the panelists and then allowing the other member to chime in as well. So we're going to try and keep this as an open flowing dialogue. But Abid, actually, I'm going to turn it over to you now with your first question. What is asset management? Why is it an important role, and what value can it deliver for ownership groups?
Well, to be an asset manager, you have to make sure you can yell and scream and pound on the desk. That is the critical skill required for an asset management. No, all joking aside, it is a different lens that gets placed on the business model. A lot of times it's looked upon as owner's hammer, but honestly, I don't think that is the way things work these days. Yes, it is looking after owner's interest to make sure that the asset performance is at optimal level, but that cannot be done by anybody, whether you have their halo on your head or not. You have to be able to collaborate with the operator, with the hotel team, with the destination itself. And this person is sort of the bridge that brings all those disciplines together. Being that our industry is so complicated and multidisciplinary angles are involved in it, that's what the asset manager does.
Roger, anything you want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, it's a multifaceted role, and I think it's just kind of echoing what Abid has mentioned there. I see it almost like a quadrangle that you have, where you've got the asset, you've got the owner sitting, in one corner, and as the asset manager, you're responsible to, really improving the ROI on behalf of the owner. In another corner, you've really got the operator, the brand sitting, and your task is really to ensure that they're delivering maximum value as per the agreement that they have, and they're delivering against that agreement. And then in the other corner, you've actually got the local operator of the asset. And so, there you're, making sure that they're delivering all the operational efficiencies and ultimately delivering a positive cash flow. And the asset manager is sitting right in the middle of that crust. And so it requires, yes, the ability to shout and scream, but, echoing that, shout and scream, you've got to be a good communicator, because there's a time to shout and scream. There's a time for schmoozing. There's a time for, really understanding all of the important stakeholders' objectives. And there's a lot of important stakeholders, and you need to get them working together in harmony. And so when understanding the complexity of that role, you also then get to appreciate the complexity of the skill set that's required.
So one group that I didn't hear either of you mention, and I'm going to let either one of you chime in on this, is what role does guest comments and feedback play into the modern role of asset management? How important is it to an asset manager to hear what guests are saying about the operations happening on site?
Well, I'll take the first dibs and Roger chime in. As a matter of fact, I was just having this conversation earlier today, quite candidly, about customer journey. If it is not for the guest, we will not have a business. And it is really that fundamental. And if ever, we have learned that now with the pandemic, when the guests stopped traveling, there was no hotel to be operated. So the guest feedback has to be kept front and center, and it has to be analyzed in the proper way. It's not that somebody said, hey, look, my coffee was cold and all hell breaks loose, but it's got to be looked at methodically, commensurate with the position of the asset and what is required. Our consumers are much smarter these days, much smarter than us. They've got 1,000 different options available. If we think that we can continue to fumble along and trip over ourselves and be able to survive, I think those days are gone, because consumer generated content is enough to bring us down to our knees. So my opinion, guest comments have to be kept front and center. One of the indices that is just as critical as GOP might be or RevPAR might be. Roger.
No, I totally agree. I mean, the sentiment score that, you are looking at TripAdvisor and all of the other online platforms to understand performance and guest feedback. But we have to, recognize the role that technology now plays. It's no longer, like 20 years ago, where you had comments, left by guests as they was, leaving the hotel. Guests are leaving, comments whilst they're still staying at the property. And so, you've got to ensure that the hotel operators are staying on top of all of those comments and are responsive to them. Because a lot of the time the guests are actually staying in the hotel, and you have a chance to actually do something about it whilst you've got the guests there. But it's fundamental, because that's the only I would say indictment on the guest potentially coming back, if you can see a positive or a negative comment.
And that ends up flowing to the bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I may add, most of our stats are historical in nature. We're always driving with our view in the back view mirror. Guest comments and these aggregates, whatever system you use, they can be somewhat predictive. So it is one of the predictive indices that if you constantly getting beat up over something and you don't do anything about it, sooner or later it is going to really be having a negative impact on your P&L.
And then the asset manager comes with the hammer on the desk and cracks the whip.
Well,
I have too many metaphors going there.
Yeah. But as I did mention there, and I think it's a valid point that the operator has the influence to have a positive, gain a positive feedback. And if you think about, how Instagram has revolutionized how, experience travel is recorded, and, you go back a little bit and you're all in the development, role, you are literally developing experiences that will lead potentially to the consumer, the guest, posting something positive about the experience. And so that goes back to a big comment. The hotels have the ability to influence, positive comments.
Absolutely. So let's take a step back for a second. And Roger, I know you started to touch on this in your earlier response, but why for hotel owners, and as you said, and as you mentioned, especially new owners, why do they sometimes struggle to comprehend how dynamic the asset management role can be and should be to ensure performance?
Ooh, that's how long have we got? Yeah, I think because a lot of the time, I think a lot of investors and owners that are new to hospitality, they believe that once you've brought the operator on board, that they basically you can be, sit back and watch the returns come in. And unfortunately, there's a lot of moving parts, as I used with that quadrangle illustration. You're having to manage a lot of parties with a lot of interests, and the owner has to understand the perspective of these parties. And not everybody has the position or the expectations of the owner. And so that's got to be counterbalanced by understanding, what the role that each party has to play. Now, bearing in mind, this has become even more complicated in I would say, the hybrid era of real estate, where real estate, you have different third parties, you have different types of contracts. You've got the franchise contract, you've got the franchise agreement. So there are different forms of agreement that will interplay with that role. So that makes it more dynamic. But go ahead.
No, so I say on that note, what do you find to be typically the more challenging arrangements? Is it the brand managed arrangement or a third party within a separate franchising? What do you find to be the most challenging for the asset manager?
Ooh, I think it's more difficult when you've got more stakeholders at the table. So that would then indicate when you've got the franchise agreement, that potentially can be more complicated because you've got more moving parts. But that being said, it is, to give the expression, I know you've got me started now, Chris. It's horses for courses. Certain properties in certain locations, require a different, a specific, and best suited to a specific agreement and a different type of, operational mandate. So it's difficult. I'm sitting on the fence on that one.
Fair enough. Abid, any thoughts on that?
Well, look, if you look at asset management, honestly, this discipline, I believe, is still in its infancy. In mature markets, it's probably better recognized in emerging markets. But our industry is so fragmented, as Roger was talking about. There are all sorts of relationships that exist. But majority of our industry is still mom and pop operated, or at least mom and pop owned. Now, some of the third party operators get involved in it. So we have just barely learned hotel management under the current environment because it's no longer that reservations are taken on a phone call and you ran an ad in the newspaper and you sit back. The environment is entirely different. So we've barely gotten used to how to operate the hotels in the current environment. Now you're trying to tell me about an asset manager? Well, what the heck is the asset manager? I don't want to have to deal with it another person. This discipline came about, if you go back, hotels were owned by institutions, particularly in the US, as a loss-making thing. They took as a tax write-off until the taxation laws changed. Then came the recession and boom, somebody had to pay attention. But the folks that were looking after the assets, they were only worried about the real estate, the brick and mortar side of it. And how are they going to get that thing off of their balance sheet immediately? The operation side was pretty much left on its own whims. But it evolved to a point that they realized that it's over a period of time. Asset management does not start and end at a certain time. It's from the very inception when a project is being conceptualized to design to opening and operating. It's the entire life cycle of it that has to be looked at. And that value is what needs to be enhanced. That's what asset management does. And it is a very hard concept to get your arms around, because it's it'll be like somebody saying, oh, here comes another guy that is going to sell me services. There are about 500 others that have just preceded him.
Right. And when I think you just made a really, sorry, go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, no, I just, before moving on to another topic, I'm prepared to get off the fence. And I'm just curious whether or not you agree with me, because in probably the most challenging structure when it comes to, operating a hotel is when the owner wants to be very hands-on.
I just had this discussion this morning and I had the hammer thrown back at me. So I agree.
But remember, I hope you threw one back that was bigger.
Yeah.
Well, guys, remember, hotel management is not a rocket science. Anybody can do it.
That's what he keeps telling me. That's literally what he keeps telling me. But no, to Roger, Abid had said something earlier that I think really segues into sort of the next question on this, is that, the world has changed dramatically in the last 15, 16 months. And how are you seeing this asset manager role change in response to COVID and the economic recession, et cetera? What changes are you seeing?
I think there are three major changes if I try and structure it into three categories here. And I think the first is technology. You touched on it somewhat, but I think technology has revolutionized everything from how the hotel is searched, booked, to designing the guest experience, to smart energy, to mention just a few. And that has this having massive repercussions on the performance of the asset. But the one thing I would like to touch on from a technology point of view is how it's influencing or has the potential to influence yield management, which ultimately influences the traditional revenue management role. In some respects, the revenue management role in the past was very passive, looking at past performance data. But technology now enables you to yield manage almost by the second, because simply by virtue of being able to see, people looking at a booking, looking at potential room configuration, looking at potential dates. And so you have the ability to influence a product and a price now. And so, that's where I think there has to be a sharp learning curve for, the asset manager overseeing and looking at how the revenue management role, needs to change moving forward. So that's number one. Number two, I think it's the hybrid real estate. We've seen now, the hotel, it's not a traditional hotel anymore, how the space is utilized and how, the other moving parts within the asset interplay with the hotel, whether we're talking about, the co-living, co-working, we're talking about, expansive well-being facilities. We've got retail, leisure, entertainment. And that now is, mixing up the way that I think, an asset manager has to think, because you're not just thinking with a hotel in your head anymore. You're having to, think about optimizing, revenue per square meter, which is not something that we have traditionally done in the hotel industry. And I think a lot can be learned there from retail. So I think the second is real estate and the changing landscape there. The third, dare I say it, it's forecasting and budget in the current climate. We just joked about, that common joke, which I think we should share. Do you think?
I think I'd go for it. I'm with you. Go for it.
Okay, because there was a visual that circulated around the hotel industry displaying 4 types of headache. The first was a migraine that appears here. The second was hypertension, which appeared at the back of the head. The third was stress, which was coming around the head like so. And then the fourth was a headache that consumed the whole head. And that's experienced by, hotel teams around the world as they try reforecasting for the 25th time each week. So, we all know how difficult it is to forecast during this, increasingly unpredictable world. Particularly when I think, and something that's not spoken about, and I'm interested to get your thoughts, is, I think we're seeing more of a K-shaped recovery than anything else. And if you're an asset manager, looking after multiple assets in different parts of the world, your job just got, more difficult. And let's, also, mention here the elephant in the room, which is the geopolitical situation. If you're managing a hotel in Portugal 2 weeks ago, you was very, very happy. And all of a sudden the UK, changed its regulations on flying, and then it's an issue. So, I think forecasting and budgeting, has become increasingly more complicated. So, yeah, maybe that was a little bit long-winded, but to summarize, technology, hybrid real estate, and forecasting and budget.
Excellent. And actually that really made me, I've been taking some notes here as you were talking, made me think, and I'm going to direct this second piece to Abid, because Abid, I know you were in the development arena for a very long time, but in today's world with, let's say, COVID and older assets, how are asset managers looking at renovations? Are they trying to speed up renovations? Are they trying to delay renovations? Are they even considering? What are you seeing, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, there is it never one size fits all. It depends on a lot of different things. In the past 16, 18 months or so, honestly, it's been all about survival, as we all know. People have had to have conversations with their lenders. The reserves have been depleted just to make sure that there's some sort of a debt service is being met or some working capital is available, because the world stopped overnight. There was not a nickel coming through the door, but there were some expenses that still had to be done. So there were not many conversations, particularly from small owners' perspective, that were occurring relative to renovations. Now, if you're part of a larger owning entity, your balance sheet is healthy, this might have been the perfect time to do the renovation to be competitive as you come out of this pandemic. You could ride the recovery wave in a fabulous way without having any business interruption. And not only that, at least for a little while, the contractors were willing to give excellent deals, so the prices were down. Now, things have changed, mind you, in US terms, because the materials have gotten more expensive all of a sudden for all the reasons we already know. But if your balance sheet is healthy enough where a renovation could transpire without displacing any business so that you come out strong and ride the recovery in a good way, that would have been the best way to do it. We were talking about asset management role. That role is a key example of what the asset management has to do, because they are dealing with the operator to make sure that the asset stays competitive to its positioning, but they're also dealing with the owner that is writing the check for these kind of renovations and making sure that the scope is reasonable and we're not cutting corners and just for the sake of having arguments, asset management becomes a pivotal role in that discussion.
Roger, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting you touch on that, because 6 months ago we built an integrated model to run scenarios and sensitive testing on renovation in a hotel, and how to optimize the available budget against what the possible upside would look like. Because we found there was very few doing that, because if an owner was contemplating renovation, they usually then go straight to a design company, and the design company says, yeah, sure, you need a renovation. And you've got a renovation. But, you need to, if you're looking at, physical control, you need to be, looking at, what's the optimized number of rooms that need to be renovated, what areas of the hotel should be renovated, what's the upside when the market comes back, when the market comes back. So, there's a greater complexity there in making that assessment. It's not, oh, we just do a renovation of the whole hotel. It's you've got to be more astute in understanding what's at play here, and how to utilize any available budget for renovation, the room count that will be assigned to. And then, if you're taking on any debt to do this, then you've got to, factor in the cost of debt, and gearing the debt structure to suit that investment model to renovations. But we had a tremendous success in being able to put this model and work with clients closely with it, because it was a very efficient way of giving a high level assessment to owners that were looking at ultimately what would be the financial upside and when.
Chris, what kind of conversations are you having, if I may ask? Have there been assets that have undertaken renovation projects in this downturn?
We're actually surprisingly starting to get inquiries for new development, to be honest. I would say our inquiries as far as renovations go have actually been slow. Most of them waiting to see where this is going and how long is it going to be dragged out. What I've been pushing for with a lot of my clients is, let's do at least the planning work now, so that as commodity prices come back down for raw materials, we can then find the right time to execute. What we've seen with some of our projects is that people put them on hold during the crisis, understandably, but they missed the boat on getting good pricing.
Yep.
And it was a sort of a catch-22 scenario. I think, in my perspective from being an asset manager, is I would just be spending this time right now formulating the plan, getting them ready, and then executing when the time is right.
And there are hotels that have undertaken renovation projects during this time, because the contractors had run-of-the-mill. The mobilization and demobilization wasn't occurring, so you could get it in and out in a rapid pace. But that meant that your balance sheet was very, very, very healthy, and you could withstand that kind of expense.
Yeah, and what's been interesting is that the groups that we're getting, either existing clients or new inquiries who we're hearing from, actually tend to be the high net worth family offices or individuals. We aren't getting a lot of traction out of our institutional clients. They are actually playing a different game of, and to be honest, I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts, because I don't know how long they can play this game. But they're playing the game of, let me sit on my hands because I want to go buy more assets than reinvest in the assets I currently have. But the culling of the field hasn't happened. And I think as long as there's government economic support, that culling won't happen. Mm-hmm. It's just sort of delaying the inevitable, to be honest. So I know some of our institutional clients, some of their assets desperately need renovations, but they don't see the upside on it there. They'd rather get, a deeply discounted new asset and value add. So that's what I'm seeing right now.
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk, let's keep going with this whole thing of the world's changing. COVID's happened. One of the other things I want to talk about as we're seeing changing roles and strategies right now is we know airlines, for example, probably even harder hit than hotels for a period of time. They've done away with change fees, rebooking fees, etc., to make it easier for clients to be more flexible. Hotels, to a lesser extent, haven't really done away with that. They give maybe a little more flexibility on rebooking, maybe not on cancellation. They've certainly increased their hotel or resort fees. I've seen those go up and more properties charging it. I get desperate times called for desperate measures, but from an asset management perspective and knowing that guests are our business, are we really retaining guests by doing that strategy? What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, if I may, some of this, quite candidly, we might not have a choice very much longer, particularly consumer protection laws out of Europe are going to take this rubbish out of the discussion, because as far as businesses that took these deposits and retained them and didn't refund them, all that is under the microscope in a huge way. So that's going to be litigated, I think, and the regulators are going to decide that the money, at least from what I understand, through the discussions, that the money belongs to the consumer, not to the business. And the businesses have been riding that wave and interest-free money for a very long time. So in some ways, that's going to come to an end. I think there has got to be some flexibility so that the consumer feels comfortable. Look, we have fed this monster, if I may, because we started with penalties on cancellations, so the booking window shrunk. People just learned that I'm going to look at the last minute on one of these websites and get the rate, and then that's what I'm going to book. So that's how they got around to it. We have propagated the consumer behavior in many ways and possibly not gained anything other than a few irritated people that legitimately could not consume on the booking that they might have made. So it's got to be a happy medium. We got to get out of this commodity mindset, if you would, because at this particular point, it's truly like a commodity. And a lot of these platforms and apps that are price shopping and telling you when to book and when not to book, we thought we were the smartest guys in the room at one point because we would change the rates at the end and put fences around it. All that has gone out the door. So it's got to be a happy medium that the client's needs have to be looked upon. But then again, some fences put in so that you can segment the different travel behaviors.
Just to add there, I think there's some interesting takeaways, and you touched on the airlines having a tough time of it, but the airline industry, this dynamic booking platform and system, but they were so ahead of the hotel industry for many years, and being able to influence booking and yield manage in ways that the hotel industry could only dream of. But in the current climate, and it's interesting because we interviewed as part of research a large OTA recently, and the feedback we got from them was that they've seen phenomenal demand, particularly for even into 2022, 2023, and they shared with us that if you've got the right product at the right price with the flexible, booking, commitments, then the consumer's interested. Because what was driving the consumer demand for travel pre-COVID, it never went away. It's still there. It's just that, there are restrictions, there's borders closed, et cetera, that is influencing the consumer demand. So, getting to the heart of your question, the hotel industry has got to be competitive with, offering flexible booking options to be competitive, and to understand the challenges that the guests are facing when making a booking. Simple as that.
So keeping on this vein, let's talk best practices. World's changing still. Abid, what are you seeing right now that you think are best practices to ensure a healthy bottom line for owners and investors, and also maintaining the quality of the experience for the guest? What are your thoughts?
I'll take the second part of the question first. As all of us have heard, and this is a mature market syndrome, not so much in emerging markets, but in mature markets, labor shortages are causing a huge heartache. Hotels and restaurants cannot seem to attract enough people. Now, look, there are differing points of views as to why that is, but as late as I believe yesterday, there was an article that people are leaving this industry in droves. Some are of the opinion that it's the wages. Some are saying that it's the government support and unemployment support or furlough benefits that have been extended. Nobody wants to come back to work. But I'm of the opinion it's a combination thereof. We no longer compete for skills only in the hotel sector. We live in a gig economy. The world around us has changed. If I can go drive for, I don't know, Uber Deliver or whatever it is, and make more money and have a flexible schedule, why wouldn't I do that? As opposed to being stuck at 7 to 3 and 3 to 11 and 11 to 7 type of shifts. That is not the environment we live in. That is not where the younger labor pool wants to work in. It's not attractive to them. So we have to change that. That is going to present a huge challenge coming out of this pandemic. But beyond that, I think the pendulum would balance and things will come back. But in immediate terms, I think the industry is facing this shortage, and the consumers are going to face some disappointments because we don't have enough people to be able to service it. The rest of the best practices, it is still somewhat of using Raja's analogies, different horses for different courses. But if you were a big box in the middle of Manhattan, or pick another city in London, it's going to take a little while. The segment that will come back fastest, as the trends are telling us, is the leisure. That's going to lead us out of this pandemic. Then the business travel, and business travel might never come back to the pre-pandemic level. It's between what Bill Gates said, that 50% is going to evaporate to nothing is going to change. I think it's somewhere in between that some of the business travel is not going to go, and conferences might be somewhere thereabout. So depending on which segment you rely on, you got to hold true to that and develop your operating plans, and it's got to be nimble operating plans. And we were joking about it earlier, that 25th rendition this week of a forecast. I think we need not go through that kind of brain surgery, but in broader terms, we've got to have some sort of gatekeepers as to how we're going to operate, because we go after leisure. Leisure assets are dying at this particular point because they cannot find enough people to be able to service the guests. But the big boxes are looking for salespeople that can go and get those meetings booked beyond rebooking period that they might have extended. So it's still cautious optimism, but I think industry, as you might have heard, all the CEOs from big companies had said that the demand is coming back faster than they anticipated. And I think that's basically what I've been hearing as well.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned the employment. I was just at a hotel next to Houston Airport the other night, and I got there at around like 5 o'clock. They had one person at the front desk responsible for checking in, at least about 70 people in line when I arrived. And the phone was ringing off the hook when I got to the phone. I was like, do you want to answer the phone? Like, go ahead. He's like, no, they'll call back. And that was the sort of the extent of where hospitality, at least for big brand hotels, was at.
Yeah.
You know, we've got only 5 minutes left. So Roger, I don't know if you wanted to chime in there, but if not, I've got sort of this ultimate wrap-up question for you.
Okay, I'll be very, very short because, I think best practice is best summarized by proactiveness in this current climate. You need dynamic asset management that have to work harder than they've ever worked before, because the utilization of the asset is not like it was 10 years ago. You have to be dynamic. You cannot be reactive. You've got to be very proactive, very innovative with the utilization of the asset. It's no longer just about selling a room and having F&B. You've got to be creative. And owners also have to understand, they also have to be, much more understanding that, the hotel landscape has changed. So the type of offerings, the type of experiences that will be, transcending to the guest, changes. So proactive management is absolutely fundamental. And an environment that's creating, new social experiential trends.
Absolutely. And again, it's following the trends is probably the biggest thing right now, is because they're changing daily. And we just have to come with long-term strategies that they're living documents, and we've got to be able to be flexible.
Exactly.
So the ultimate $1 million question to you, Roger, with there being so many financial KPIs and a multitude of real estate and accounting performance metrics, for asset managers, which is the ultimate KPI? What's the magic number that people should be looking at?
Well, as you quite rightly mentioned, there's enough KPIs in the hotel industry and asset management. I mean, there's a laundry list of all of these metrics, but ultimately it comes down to internal rate of return. I mean, that's where all roads lead. Ultimately, is delivering the owner's objective for the real estate that potentially leads to the exit strategy that they may have not, documented. So for me, it's IRR.
Abid, any thoughts on that?
Well, look, my response would be it depends, because again, I'm going to go back to it's not one size fits all, depending on the stage in the life cycle of that asset. It might be a different focal point. But it's sort of like asking, what is the average margin in a hotel? Well, it depends. It depends where you are, whether it's a convention hotel, business hotel, resort. So it would really depend. But if you absolutely put me up against the wall to say, hey, pick something, from an operator perspective, it is going to have to be a GOP per available room type of stuff, because that's how the contracts are written. They don't look beyond that. But from an overall asset point of view, you're going to have to go back and measure to the original investment thesis and what's the same, what's changed, and are we getting to the goalpost that was established when the transaction occurred.
So we have 2 minutes left. Your crystal ball, what do you guys see is going to probably happen over the next 6 months? What's your guys' bellwether right now? You think from an asset management perspective, the economy is continuing to improve and we're going to be okay, or do we need to keep hunkering down? Give us your 30-second thought here. Abid, go ahead.
I think it's going to come back faster than any of us anticipated. Now, I say that, but it's a really broad comment. You got to look at the specific market behaviors, but I think the demand is definitely there. And as has been talked about, the revenge travel is going to kick in because we've all been isolated for so long. And I think it's going to be much better than any of us anticipated.
Roger, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I agree. The revenge buying, is upon us. However, it is a K-shaped, recovery. So we've got to be conscientious of, what market's going to come back first. In hospitality, the American market, US market is really, seeing tremendous growth. But that's not, translated into some markets in Europe. We're seeing great, traction in Asia in certain places right now. So, look, as I mentioned before, the consumer habit and need for travel never went away. It never went away. It's still there. It will come back and come back in abundance when there's more predictiveness about travel.
Absolutely. Well, we're out of time. Roger, Abid, thank you both for giving us 45 minutes out of your day. Great conversation, and thank you for everyone who joined in the audience.
Well, thrilled to be part of this discussion with my esteemed colleagues. Thank you for having me.
Yes,
Thank
likewise. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Abid, and thank you to the organizers for putting on a wonderful show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.